Hello, hey everyone, hey Saber Legion. Sorry, one sec here. I just got that other stuff playing in my head. Um, Welcome to another episode of Repost and Riposte. Today I am going to talk about a TSL bad habit, and my mic's it's going to go off right as soon as that happens. I'm still here. Just bear with me. I just I forget to hit record on this GoPro, and it has an auto shut off. And if I don't do that, it will go black. Okay. Now we're back. Sorry about that. Um, so, like I said, welcome to Repost and Riposte. And hey, hey, Christian, how we doing? I'm going to talk about fixing bad TSL habits, which is an ongoing uh, topic that I've kind of focused on, and I'm specifically going to be talking about bad lunges or bad lunging practices, and kind of break down some of the things that you can do to correct your lunge and fix it. Sorry, I'm just making a couple adjustments here. Um, Mainly because it's something that we learn when we're first starting out, and then we kind of ignore it beyond that. So it can become an issue down the line for people. So that's, and when I say an issue down the line, I'm referring to specifically, it can be an issue when you are um, performing one and you can cause potential injury. You can cause potential, well, if it's bad technique, it can, bite you back in a match. So these are things that you want to think about in relation to sorry, I'm just looking at everything and I'm getting distracted. It's an important thing to look at in relation to what you when you do a lunge, that you're doing it to the best of your ability, that you're not causing yourself undue strain on your joints, and that you're doing it so it's effective in the context of the fight. So I'm going to kind of go over some of the common elements, the common things that I see people do, that I do, and just to kind of clean up a lunge. And one thing I will note is that there are a lot of different schools of thought on the lunge. There's an Italian school on it, and then amongst the different Italian weapons, there's different things. There's obviously one and two handed lunges, depending what weapon you're using. If you're in something like an exotics, or even or something more, lunging is going to change. The basic thing when I'm talking about a lunge is I'm talking about you taking a deeper step forward to the side or slightly to an angle toward your opponent to make a dynamic offensive attack. And however you want to approach that is up to you. But I feel that majority of these guidelines or things I'm just going to talk about, things to prevent, they're all fixable, no matter what your lunge is, one-handed, two-handed. It's just a matter of thinking about and being conscious of what you're doing, and working on that. For some people, that might seem, that they don't want to go back to the rudimentary things. Honestly, I find myself going back to rudimentary items more often than not. Sorry, I didn't realize OBS was open. There we go. They're going to go back to those. I go back to those things more often than not because I find that I clean those things up, the less I have to worry about them in a fight, the more they become second nature. Yes, a lunge is second nature to me now, but the cleanest lunge possible maybe isn't. And that is the goal, right? The lunge that I don't have to worry about potentially blowing out my knee, or, overturning an ankle or something like that, is very useful. That's something that you don't have to worry about your body doing that, because you've already established the muscle memory, and you can avoid those common issues that a lot of people do. And again, some of them are tactical, some of them are, just kind of biomechanical things to consider. So that's the key thing I'm going to talk about today. And if you have questions related to that, related to other TSL things, I'm here to answer them. It's not something you don't have to ask questions, but it does make it easier. And if you're on for the live show, if you're listening after, you can leave comments and I can reply. But if you're on for the live show, I can specifically, give you a little bit more targeted analysis, or and talk to you about it. So feel free to do so, and I will attempt to answer your question as best I can. And it doesn't have to be related to lunging; it can be related to any type of fight training within TSL or other TSL questions. So I don't think I have any housekeeping things other than CombatCon is less than 3 months away now. If you're not aware of CombatCon, please look it up, combatcon.com. I think I have that. I have their email in my captions, but that doesn't matter. But combatcon.com, you can see that is where our annual international tournament is going to be, where we're going to have a 50 and over, a women's division, an exotics division, and an open standard division. So that will be at CombatCon in Flamingo in July, end of July, about 3 months from now. And I'd love to see you all there. There is certain precautions needed, in order to go. So vaccination is a requirement of attending CombatCon this year. So just so you guys know, but either way, I will go back into the topic of lunging, and I'll dive right in. And if there's questions, just I'll grab them as I need to. When I'm away from the computer, I can check. When I come back, I'll check every few minutes or so. But I'm going to flip over to there, and I'm going to just start talking about the lunge. So rotate this. Okay. So, like I said, there's a lot of schools of thought on a lunge. What is a lunge? What do you do with it? I'm going to use this short one because I'm going to lunge here, but then a couple times I'll start lunging at Bob. You can see me from behind, but a lunge is typically, let's just work some terminology out. Okay. A lot of people, will call okay, they're fighting one-handed and they'll do this, right? Or maybe they'll even lean a little bit. That is traditionally what we would call a thrust. You are thrusting your arm out, and it doesn't matter right now in this context which guard you're in, but you're thrusting with your arm out. You're extending your arm in full extension, and that is a thrust. Now, the lunge is typically, when I'm talking about an offensive lunge, not just literally a lunge like we would do for exercising, but no, I'm talking about a lunge where, say, in a one-handed stance, I would be extending my blade and stepping and then pulling back to close extra distance in a more dynamic way. That is the intention of a lunge. So just so we don't people get terms confused or something like that, that's a thrust, that's a lunge. So things to think about with a lunge. Obviously, as I said, there's multiple ways you can lunge. There's different variations, but the concept is the same. It is a step from guard forward, typically about the length, and I say the length of your foot or greater. So this is technically a lunge, but you don't really gain as much advantage dynamically. I could gain the same distance by doing something like that and leaning. So taking the bigger step and lunging is what you would call a lunge. Like I say, typically when I am teaching students in rapier, I say a lunge is the length of your foot, and then you work your way out. Mainly because most people either do one of two things. Either they push themselves too hard and they cause strain on their leg, their joints, their knees, whatever. But then the second thing is that it makes it that much harder for them to pick up the little idiosyncrasies that you should be correcting with a lunge, because there's a lot of factors to it that can impact it positively or negatively. So let's see here. I'm just double checking any comments. No. Cool. So let's move my rapier here so I can kind of step here. big thing that I'm going to do right now is, all right, so one-handed lunge, right? I'm thinking of this from a rapier perspective. I'd be in my ordinary guard and I'd have my hand here. Obviously, we don't do hand parries. So you can think from the context of saber. Sometimes that's on the hip, sometimes that's behind the back. Some people do rested here because it's just comfortable for balance. As long as we're not making the hand a target, that's the important thing with a one-handed lunge. And thinking about it in the context of a lunge, you start with the extension and the thrust. That is the first thing you want to do. We don't want to step and then lunge out. Why? Two reasons. One, if you don't extend, you haven't picked your target yet. So either A, you haven't picked your target yet, and if it needs to change, that's going to be more complicated and difficult to do on the go when my foot is already moving forward. Or B, the other reason is, that's okay. My one camera is just being a little mad at me today, and that's okay. So basically, if you extend here, my blade is before my body. This is the closest target. I am essentially protecting things behind me. Obviously, if it has a Suba on it, so if I grab this one and it has a Suba on it, I have a little bit of guard that I can use. I can pick what guard I'm fighting from. If I'm fighting from, Secunda, Terza, or Cart, or 2, 3, or 4, I can lunge from a high, a prima, or a first guard as well. But the key thing is that I'm putting this in front of me, so there's a little bit of a guard, right? A little bit of protection. In a rapier circumstance, I have a little bit more because I have quillins and a hand guard, and there's a whole nother element of protection. But if I'm doing this and I step and then I put my arm out, two things happen. One, your opponent sees it, right? Basically, this is a very big action. You can see it happening. It's very easy to react to. You see my foot moving, you see my body moving, and right now your opponent has no reason to feel threatened by you, right? There is no lunge, there's no blade in their face. When I extend my arm, and then with that shortly following, complete the lunge, the blade is threatening. I'm aiming for a target. Right now I'm aiming for their face, but I could be aiming for their somewhere in their chest or their arm, I wouldn't really aim a thrust to lower targets like that, but mainly because thrusting targets are not legal to a certain degree in TSL in those areas. So I'd be aiming for their chest or head. So I'm aiming for the head because I would consider that probably the safest point to lunge, because a lot of times with chest armor, it's easy for it to get glanced up into the throat, which we know is not legal. So I'm extend my arm. Again, I'm just doing it from cart or fourth or cart just for reference, and I'm doing a one-handed. I will show this with two-handed as well. But I'm extending, my body weight shifts forward, and then I'm stepping the distance, and that completes the lunge for me. There are certain treatises, and I know Mark Carrico could say, this one says to lean, this one doesn't. Certain treatises talk about a certain leaning action that basically you're pulling forward into a thrust, and then your blade is pulling you forward until you can't go anywhere else and you can't keep your balance and you step, and that's the optimal lunge length for you. That's the safest lunge length. That is one way to figure it out. I like to think about that because in reality, you should be pulled forward a little bit, but not pulled forward with some of the other bad habits people do when they're lunging. So again, first thing with a lunge, obviously, be in a guard. And so like same thing with like a two-handed thing, right? So if let's just say I'm here in like a long point, right? I'm extended and I extend, right? And I might lean here. And in this case, because it's two-handed, I might pass forward and do a passing lunge. But, I could also theoretically do that. It's the same kind of thing, same concept. Extend, thrust, hit. And that gives me the ability to track my target. If I'm going to just hit Bob here, but if I'm going to be here and I want to hit Bob in the head, right? If I step, let's just say I step here and I'm going to lunge, I'm going to do a two-handed lunge. So if I step here and extend my arm, yes, I can make that happen. But one, I've kept myself open. And then two, if the target moves, I can't really adjust it. So if I'm here and then Bob moves, theoretically, it's harder for me to make that move. But if I'm here and I'm tracking it in with my eyesight, right, and he changes, it's easier for me to do that. So it's easier to make changes on the fly when you do that. Just gonna double check the comments. Nothing. Okay. So that's another aspect of it to think about is getting the biggest. I'd say that's the biggest thing. I think I've talked about blade before body a bunch of times. I don't know if I've specifically delved into that as far as like with cuts and things like that, but the concept of blade before body is something you'll find across almost every weapon discipline that has a curriculum of some sort, whether that be centuries old treatise or handed down information. Most competent martial arts instructors using weapons will tell you put your blade, your weapon, not necessarily, I'm saying blade in this case, but your weapon in front of your body before you make the strike. If I present myself and do things like this, and I present my body in the lunge and then extend, I have protected myself. Because what if I lunge, right? And then they decide to do some type of strike, like they're going to strike at my shoulder, and I need to go like this. Cool. But if I step here and they do that strike, now I have to travel all this distance to get up there. So this will protect me as well. It'll close out a line, right? This side of me is fairly protected. I could slightly lean if I had to. It gives me a little more flexibility to react in the middle of a lunge, even though we don't always get to react. But it gives me a little bit extra reaction time. But then on top of that, it is threatening for my opponent. So they have to react as well. If they don't react to my blade, they're just going to get hit. And you're going to close that distance. And good, that's exactly how we want a lunge to work. But it doesn't always go like that when we move our body and we step first. And the basic way to think about it is your body is a bigger object to see than this blade. And the other thing is that humans have very bad depth perception. So a tube coming at your head like this is essentially a bad thing, especially a lighted tube coming at your head. If you can split their depth perception, that is hard to see. There's a blind spot, right? It's just a natural element of how our vision works. And you can use that to your advantage, so me lunging into someone's head, right? Or lunging into someone's head can help protect me and can help confuse my opponent even. Sometimes they'll just instinctively just go, and like want to bat it away because it feels very uncomfortable to have a blade be an object being thrown at your face in that blind spot. So it's not comfortable for your brain is basically telling you to get out of there, right? So people might react just instinctively. They might just cower away, and then you're like, oh, they moved, and then I just tip, and then I hit them, right? It's like, oh, they don't like that. They tip, and I move my blade to the inside or to the outside, right? It gives me little abilities to adjust. So I'm being offensive, I'm being defensive, and I'm saving my move time. It'll take less time in the tempo of the fight to make that lunge than it would be to say have to react to something. So if I go here, lean forward, and then bring my blade up and go like this and have to change it, that's a lot more work. If that makes sense. So that is the first part. I did see one thing pop in. Oh, no problem, Mark. So I was talking about lunging. I was talking about the basic first part of the lunge, of the extension and the step into the lunge, and basically how we, why we do that. Why do we put the blade in front of us? For the multiple reasons of, offensive reasons of, being threatening to your opponent, defensive reasons of putting some type of guard or some distance between what your opponent might consider a target. So if they're a blade chaser, but then on top of that, it's a smaller action for them to see. So here to here, they don't necessarily see it as easily as here to here, right? Not counting also the distance I would have to travel to do something like that. And then also if my target changes. So that's kind of what I talked about. That was the basic part of like the beginning of the lunge. And mainly that it is also the length of your foot or longer is typically a lunge. That we wouldn't consider a lunge something that is shorter than that. That is more of a step than a lunge, because that's the main thing. So let's just see what we got. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just looking at everything. Michael. Okay. Tips to break a student from flinching. Yeah, I can discuss that. But Mark said here, 12-inch blades and no holds between hits, and you can't move your feet. He's not wrong. He's definitely not wrong on that. So, that's what's happening. That's okay. So as long as I do this, I know you'll see that pop up, but that's okay. My GoPro, I didn't empty out the SD card, so I don't actually record something to it. I just need to record it or have it record. So, yeah, don't do it. Yeah, Mark's not wrong, but it's not the best solution. But there are better solutions to it. So, all right, I'm gonna flip back. I just saw that people were doing stuff. So, the big thing to if you're referring to flinching as far as like reacting to someone lunging at your face, exposure is the best way. Is one of the best ways to train yourself. But there's two elements to that exposure. Like if you're flinching to hits and you're reacting, did I already talk about this? I might have actually already talked about this in a past Repost and Riposte. I think I might have. I feel like it was like a few weeks ago. So you'd have to search the Facebook group, because if you're on YouTube, I've only done 3 episodes on YouTube. So you'd have to search the Facebook group to find it. But I'm pretty sure I did a thing about instinctive responses. But flinching to a lunge, I will go into. It is really about exposure. You need to know 2 things, in my opinion, to retrain your brain that it's okay. One, obviously be wearing the gear, because I still, get a little flinchy if I'm even moving at a slow speed and something gets a little close for comfort to me or to someone else without wearing gear. If I'm like, we're just doing real slow play, and then something like, I knock their blade out of the way and then they step in and it's like, oh, I was right next to their face. If that happened to me, like I did that, I got like a very, very light bonk to the head without, how much we were just doing like very basic kind of like knocking the blade away and then just kind of presenting. And I got like a minor bonk to the head. That's not, yeah. So you're going to flinch regardless. So what my recommendation is wear what you need to feel safe. First of all, make sure your armor, excuse me, protects you. And once you know that you can take a thrust, not like a super hard one. I just mean like the standard thrust or hit to your head, to your body, to your other parts, that you can take a thrust to the chest. Because honestly, this thing hurts if you don't have the right chest armor. So wearing the chest armor, take the thrust. It will feel a lot better when you have the right stuff. So if you take that hit because you didn't defend yourself, you'll feel more comfortable. The second element, so once you are comfortable, the armor is going to protect you. The second part is training your body to know that either that you how to protect you without ever even taking that hit. So that could mean through parries. If I'm going to get thrust to the head and I need to do just like a windshield wiper or something like that, or I need to just step, you know, figure out what you need to do to keep yourself safe. But a lot of it is exposure to those dangerous scenarios and making a situation where you feel safe. Um, and I mean, literally mean like you feel safe that like, I know that if a thrust comes in at my head, I can block, or I know that I can step and block, or that I can just step and lean, something simple like that. Like start with that, and then the trick is that make that action even smaller, if that makes sense. So like you don't, when I say, I'm going to block, I don't want to do the biggest block in the world and bring it over. Like I'm talking about what is the minimum you need to do. So like their blade could get as close as like right here in front of my face, and I can block or move or maneuver to avoid that. And I'm comfortable with that. That's a comfortable position. If they're coming at me and I go, yeah, obviously I'm flinching, I'm doing a big action, I can't really follow up. But if I do something like if I could just say like, if I'm going to block like this, I'm just going to do this, okay? Like, so assuming a thrust is coming in at my face and I can time it right and I can hit like that, right? The advantage of me hitting like that is that now I've knocked their blade to the outside of my line. They are, for all intents and purposes, completely open. I can just extend my blade out. Maybe I might have to step, but I can just extend my blade and hit them. So it's like bam, bam, right? But all I did was bring it to here. I didn't need to go, and that's my block. And then it takes me longer to get there. And then also they have more time to react and create the second intention. So the way I had it described to me in rapier, because rapier is a lot of blades being thrust, being put in your face. So you get this tiny little thing and you push it at somebody's face repeatedly. It makes you uncomfortable. It's not something we're instinctively as humans comfortable with. But the intention is that I needed to figure out what guards or footwork or technique I needed to do. So when they thrusted their blade, and now this is a little different of a game, but if I can potentially do a mechanical maneuver or some technique that their blade will extend and it will be right here next to my face. I'm still alive. It never touched me. My guard is protecting me, right? But it got that close and that I have killed them successfully. And I've pulled that off a couple times in a tournament with rapier. And let me tell you, that feels absolutely wonderful, mainly because your opponent doesn't have the time to react to why that didn't work. And you've already hit them usually by the time they try to go to the second intention. So it's the same thing, even though we don't bind up like we do, like rapier does a little bit with blade contact. It's still the same thing. It's still, if I'm going to block, or maybe I'm going to block and thrust, and I'm going to just extend there. That's a big action, right? So I can shorten that up and not flinch. So I can step. Maybe I only need to step this much. Okay, only need to step that much. I only need to do that much of a defense to block them. And now I'm set up for the next action. Bam. There's many ways to do it, but like I say, the thing is exposure and trusting your armor, first of all, because you will fail at it no matter what level you're at occasionally. And trusting in your guards, your footwork, and your technique to protect you just enough. And I say just enough because if you go so far out, you'll still flinch and react, and you will not get comfortable with the blade being around your head or your arms or your chest or your chest or whatever. So you just need to expose yourself, but expose yourself to that danger. I'm going to say danger like in quotes because obviously we're wearing appropriate armor, so you're not exposing yourself to any danger. And you can basically convince your body with other techniques that you can keep yourself safe. That will help with your confidence in the ring immensely. Doesn't mean that you're gonna, be able to conquer anybody, but there's gonna be situations that you're gonna still react instinctively, but it really will cut it down. You won't be as worried when someone just like comes right out, and they're like, okay, and I'm going to use a lunge as an example since we were talking about lunges. Bam. Okay. That's scary, right? Someone comes up and they just, okay, bam, and they're just going to hit you. That's a scary thing. Can you react with a small action to protect yourself, whether that's footwork, blade work, whatever, and without having that instinctive, flinch? You got to expose yourself to that. It doesn't mean you need to be hitting the head for an hour. It means that like you start slow, you work your way up, and you figure out, okay, how can I not react? And then that, by the time you're working at speed, you know what small actions you need to do to work. So hopefully that answers your question. Just gonna double check here. Okay, reaction. Yeah, he was talking about reaction to the lunge, but it is the same thing, and you are welcome, Michael. So I'm going to go back into the lunge a little bit more now. So okay, so I talked about the beginning of the lunge, and the beginning of the lunge being an important thing to find your target, figure out your distance. That also, that is another thing about extending into a thrust before the lunge, is that you can get a better idea of the measure and the distance to your opponent. So, if I step and then want to lunge, I've already closed distance without knowing that how far it's going to take me to get there. I have no measuring stick. If I extend and I hit my opponent, great. There was no need to step. There's no need to move my body. If I extend here, right, and know that, in order to hit him, hit my opponent, I have to step this far. And that's probably a little deep, right? Not that we never want to do that. I'm just saying that, sometimes this is all I need to measure. So I can be here in a fight, or be here in a fight and go, no, okay. But other times I'll be here in a fight and go, and want to thrust in and move. So it's a good measuring tool. Do not use it all the time. Your opponents will pick up on it. But in the context of learning it and learning better measure and learning the distance between your reach from a lunge and your opponent, it's a good practice tool. So other aspects of the lunge. So we talked about from the beginning what we're doing. So now we're into the lunge, the specific details of the lunge. And if there's questions here, let me know. But if I extend into let me get into a better stance. So if I extend into a thrust and lunge in, the step and the lunge is where a lot of people make mistakes. Now, I'm going to say this from the perspective of fighting in a historical, historical martial art like rapier, where the intention of it is that you need to lunge and you need to be able to get to safety, or you're dead. Yes, in TSL, it's first point. I'm just going to approach this from the perspective of we're still trying to keep ourselves alive and ourselves safe from other hits, from an after blow or from just even an initial strike, right? So that's how I'm approaching it, as opposed to saying, well, you can just lunge as far as you want and you can get in like this. Yes, that's like what you could theoretically do in Saber Legion, and it's what you could theoretically do in modern Olympic fencing, is that you can just lunge in, and if you to gain right of way, and then you can do these deep lunges that you never need to step back from. I'm approaching it that you need to be able to step back from your lunge. So a couple things with that. If I make a lunge and I'm at a good distance and I've made the lunge, I want to be able to keep my head upright. I've talked about head leaning in the past, but with a lunge, it is also important to stay upright, because two things happen. If I lean, first of all, my weight has shifted forward. It's going to take that much more effort to recover from that lunge. The other thing is that now this is the closest target on my hand. This is the closest target on the head. When all I do is this, and now the only target is my hand to my arm, and that's the only target. And I have somewhat of a guard and the length of my blade to protect me. So that's two reasons we don't lean the head, because we can't get our weight back as easily, and we don't want to present a target. And that will also, theoretically, if you do this and you lean your head forward, it will also drive your knee forward, potentially too far. So I'm going to talk about the knee thing. So there's a lot of schools of thought on this. But I'm going to talk about it from the perspective of you don't have a lot of experience. I mean, you may have some physical issues that prevent you from getting a super, super deep lunge. If you look at an Italian treatise or really any treatise with like a rapier lunge, a one-handed lunge, most people are going to be lunging. I'm going to kind of do it to the side just so you can kind of see where my knee is bending. You see them do something like this, right? And they're way forward. That's hard to do in jeans, but you get the idea. They're way forward. Their knee is essentially like here. It's way over. A lot of people are going to have certain thoughts about you only want to be here, right? You want to have your knee over your ankle. Other thoughts are you shouldn't go past your toe because of stress and strain you create on your joints, on your ankle, on your knee. At full speed, you could be risking injury. So my recommendation that I give to everybody just learning a lunge is you learn the lunge of stepping the width of your foot to start. So stepping the width of your foot, and you keep it knee over the ear. And then way, if you bend forward a little bit, it's not the end of the world. But if you start here and you're right here in the lunge and your knee is just over your toe, and you're just learning it and you start to do it at speed, you might start to lean forward a little bit too much. And we don't want to create any problems there. My GoPro hates me today. So sorry about that. Okay. Cool. But that's okay. I just wanted to fix that for when I go back to the other camera. But that's a key thing is that the knee, I would say don't have it past your toe at the deepest part of your lunge. Anything past your toe, you could be risking injury. My suggestion for starting is, you don't go past knee above your ankle, kind of creating a straight line here. And then, like I say, if you lean and like suddenly, I lean forward a little bit, you still have control over your lunge and you're still able to get back quickly enough. Same thing with stepping too far into your lunge. If you start stepping too deep and you're newer to this, right? The amount of time, even if everything else is perfect in your lunge, right? Like I pull off a perfect lunge here. And I don't consider this perfect, but it's as good as I can do right now. And I want to get back. I need to be able to push off on my front foot, and that brings me back into my guard, whatever that guard may be, whether I'm here, it doesn't matter. If I step with two-handed, I'm going to step back to here. So you need to make sure that you can get back. So having your head back is a way to retire easier. Not stepping further than you are able to physically is a good thing. Now, on the flip side of training to get a longer lunge, what I would say is figure out what your optimal lunge length is right now. And when you practice, add an inch to it over time. So if I know that this is all I can lunge to on an average length, okay, I'm going to lunge here, and I can go deeper, but I'm not wearing the right pants for it, right? If I was wearing shorts or a kilt, I'd be okay. So, okay, but this is my optimal lunge range. Okay, I'm going to work on that. But now I'm doing warm-ups and stuff like that. Okay, well, I'm going to step here. So that's me about, a quarter of my foot extra. And I'm going to just keep going, and that's my lunge that I'm going to work on. That's a good idea to extend it. And when I say extend the length of your lunge, I don't mean lean your knee forward more. I mean stepping physically deeper so you're creating a wider gap between your legs. So that is another element of training out your lunge to get more distance. So you'll feel more comfortable when you step into the lunge, and you'll feel more comfortable when you step back from the lunge. That move will get much more comfortable from the deeper positions if you work on it every now and then. It's just making sure that you're properly gradually progressing towards that towards that point. I'm going to check stuff here. I don't know if there's actually too much else, but I'll talk about some technique stuff as well. And that's not working. That's okay. There we go. Okay, now it's working. Sorry about that. Okay. Yeah. In relation to build confidence is the answer to most things in sword fighting. Yes. And it is all in the genes. Yes. I mean, I would say these genes are not optimal for this, but it's optimal for not showing off my legs. And they're comfortable enough for most of the movement that I do in this. So it's not too bad for me. So if there are any questions about that, that is, I would say that's the majority of the things that people should focus on. And when I say that, I mean, those are things you should be considering when you're looking at your lunge. Am I putting my blade before my body? Am I extending my arm and then stepping in, as opposed to stepping and then extending my arm? Am I leaning my head forward? Am I stepping too deep? Am I leaning my knee past my foot? Am I leaning in my lunge that I can't get back and retire correctly? You think about all of those things, and I don't think of them all at once. Think of them in the context of one thing at a time, correct that one thing, and then move on to the next thing. And some of you may only have one or two of those things that are an issue. So you only need to apply this to the things that are applicable to you. You don't have to take all of it and say, well, this is exactly the right way to do it. And the way I do a lunge is not the exact way everybody should do it. There are different techniques for lunges, different systems, different styles. But the basic mechanics of extend your arm, step into it, and step back are very universal to any system that involves a lunge. And again, I'm referring to this in a historical sense, so I'm not referring to this in a sports sense where you want to lunge as deep as you can, as quick as you can, and it's okay if you can't recover from it. I say do it in this way, in the more historical way, because if you do a lunge and it doesn't work, you're going to be fighting more. There is no advantage to you stepping so deep that you can't do anything else, because there is no right of way rule in really any saber fighting. So that's, well, I guess there is technically kind of a right of way rule in the French system, but that doesn't allow thrust lunges. So that's a totally different system. And so that's something to just keep in mind with your lunges, what you're going to do and how you maneuver. Find the areas that are working, that aren't working. Listen to your body. A lot of times your knees and your ankles and your hip joint there, that will tell you if you're doing something wrong in your lunge. There's a couple other things I want to point out that are about bad lunge techniques, but those are the primary things that almost anybody can apply probably one thing to. Some of the other things I'm going to mention are a little more nitty gritty and specific to certain situations, and also maybe more about technique than necessarily about the safety of your body, keeping yourself free from injuries. So let me just do this and flip this. You'll hear a little beep. Please ignore the beep. Ignore it. It's just me fixing that. All right. So a couple other things with the lunge. A couple just little things to keep in mind. Another common thing that happens is someone will lunge and their opponent is, well, let's say our opponent is right here. And I'm going to hit them with a lunge and I extend and I'm going to hit them. Great. Okay, good. So we know that if I extend and I hit him, I'm good. But watch this. Okay, I still hit him. Now I'm starting to miss, right? Now I'm starting to hit to the side. Oh, there I actually put my body before my blade. What happened? I turned my toe. That's a big one that people do. There are scenarios where you will have to turn your toe for in a weird way to maneuver, but 90% of basic lunges that happen in a fight, your front toe here. So when you step with the heel toe, your toes should be pointing to your opponent. That will guide your blade. If I turn, my blade and my body will guide me to the left or to the right. And it's not really reliable how much, because depending on other factors, I could move more to the left or more to the right or more off target. So I want to make sure that my toe is pointing. So if my opponent is to the left slightly and I extend to them and then I turn my body like that, that's fine because my toe is pointing to the opponent. So that is a big way to throw off your targeting. And it definitely happens a lot in TSL because people get really into these lunges and they do these steps. Like I do not recommend, unless you're doing a passing step, which is a passing lunge or a passing step, which is a different technique and is one of those more advanced. When using it in this way, it's one of those more advanced techniques that if you don't understand the basics of keeping your foot pointing at your target in the lunge, you shouldn't be moving into passing lunges. When I talk about a passing lunge, I mean, like if I'm extending and I need to hit them, this is not really comfortable for me to point my toe, right? So what I do is I keep this toe pointed at them, right? And I extend and then bam, and I step to an angle so I'm comfortable, right? But this toe still kept me in line. So keeping your toe on the opponent is definitely important. Especially even happens if I'm just stepping slightly off to the line to create more opposition, meaning pushing my blade at an angle to protect myself. So if I'm stepping here, notice, well, I don't know if you can really see it, but if you can see it, my toe is pointed at my opponent, as opposed to if it was straight on, it would be there. So a subtle thing, same thing with here. If I step out here, my toe is turned to face my opponent, that it is adjusting where it's pointing based upon that. So keep that in mind too. That is a common one. That is one I see beginners, more advanced fighters. Everybody does it in the heat of the moment. I probably do it a bunch of times as well. But the better you can get that targeting with the toe, getting that heel toe and knowing, okay, exactly where I'm going. Okay, I'm going over there. I'm going over there. I'm just kind of showing that when I go heel, toe, that's my chance to adjust, right? That toe is pointing to the opponent. The other part of it I will talk about, and one thing I'm probably not going to discuss, but is that making sure that you're stepping light on your lunges, that you're stepping light, that you're not heavy, because also that will dictate how easy it is to recover, but also puts a lot of pressure on your joints. So don't step heavy. That's why I say heel, toe, and you're just rolling right into it. Bam. Bam. And it's very comfortable. Now your back foot. Common one I see is when people are, especially at their full length, is they go here and then they roll up their back foot. So my suggestion is keep your back foot on the balls of the feet, and the flat of your foot. Keep that on the ground. Do not roll up your ankle. That will put excess pressure on your ankle, and it actually makes your recovery a little bit slower too. Because if I step here and I'm properly planted, I can push back my front foot, and when the weight shifts back here, I can immediately get back, and my back foot is properly taking the extra weight. If I lean forward and I'm rolled like this, right, and my foot is rolled up, I push back. There's a little bit of wobbliness and an imbalance that occurs. So that's another thing to think about, is how is your foot rolling? And I still do that in a deep lunge, sometimes in the context of a fight. I do it kind of a lot of times with a reverse lunge. So if I'm here and I'm stepping, a lot of times I might roll up my roll up the back of my foot, which is a bad habit to do. So that's some other things to think about that can throw off your technique and your balance and your stability. Another reason with the back foot is that if you should hit your opponent and there's like a percussive hit or something like that, like you hit them dead on and like there's a little pushback, you can take more impact. Your leg and your foot can balance you and keep you balanced while that's happening. That's assuming your other part of your technique is good. Let me see, what's my time? Okay, going on about a little less than an hour. So I'll say one more thing. The last thing is on the extension of your arm, the actual extension into a lunge. Do not bend your arm like that. One primary reason, if you hit your opponent, and I'm just going to push against Bob like this with my elbow bent even slightly, the power of that hit and the pushback goes right into my elbow. Versus if I'm in a lunge and I'm here or here, it doesn't matter, we're here, and my arm is not fully locked out but fully extended, all of the impact goes back here and into my shoulder and into the rest of my body. So there's more strength associated with that than my elbow is. If you do that, you're going to get yourself a nice elbow strain, or maybe some tennis elbow. So making sure that you're fully extended and and the impact is being absorbed all the way into your shoulder, because all of this is much stronger than just this. And you want to make sure that you can do this consistently in a fight without tiring yourself out. So, okay. All right. Okay. Cool. Keeping the knee straight. Mark, you're talking about bending your knee forward, because I did talk about that. Not which knee? You mean your back knee as well? Yes. You might be talking about back knee. So yes, keep your back knee straight as well. Do not bend that. There are techniques that might incorporate a bend, like a gather lunge. But again, we're talking about just a lunge. We're not adding special things. Most of the rules that we talk about, are in martial arts are do this until I tell you not to do it. So you make sure that you have a degree of proficiency with that. Yes, the front knee not going side to side. Yes, I did not talk about that, but what I'll say about the front knee not going side to side, if you align your foot properly, you're stepping heel to toe, you're not stepping too hard, and you're not overextending forward with your knee, you can keep your knee straight. So if you move it to the side, all of those things that I talked about with working with your front leg and your front knee, if you don't think about them and actively do them, yes, there is a chance that your knee could buckle to the side, and you could get a very serious injury. I have seen someone blow out their knee in a fight on a angled lunge, where basically they took a little bit extra angle on that knee, and it went out this way on the right knee, stepping at an angle, while doing a technique as well, and bam, knee gave out. And granted, I haven't seen that person in 2.5 years, but I saw him a year later after that happened, and they were still walking with a cane. And the person was fairly physically active at that point, in multiple arts. So that's just keep that in mind, that keeping the knee straight on a lunge is a way to prevent very, very serious injury. At the very least, preventing strain and just aching and overall pain. So keep that in mind. So is there any questions about lunging, something you want me to talk about? Like I said, it applies one and two handed. There are obviously differences between schools of thought, between rapier, saber, side sword, long sword, small sword. The lunge techniques are slightly different. Find the one that works for you, that works with the weapon you're using, the weapon type, the balance, and everything, and then incorporate that. But you'll find that all of these things that I talked about are universal to any of them. There might be a couple exceptions out there to certain weirder kind of schools of thought, but majority of it is going to be absolutely the same. Just following all those little things. And like I say, do not attempt to try to do all of them at once. Try to analyze what you're doing and seeing what you're doing wrong. And then try to fix one thing, right? Because two things can either happen. You fix it and great, cool. Focus on the next thing then. Or you fix it and a new problem arises as a result of you fixing it. So that meant something else was out of whack or imbalanced or not working properly. So that's the advice I would give for that moving forward. So I don't see any specific questions. I'm trying to think if I had anything else I wanted to say. I talked about Combat Con in July. People should register, attend. If you can't register and attend, we strongly recommend you do the virtual Combat Con because you can take some classes. We will obviously be hopefully streaming, assuming bandwidth is good, all weekend. Worst case, we will have the finals live streamed, but we will be live streaming all of that and hopefully bringing commentary and other things as the tournament progresses. So all of those things it's going to be a great time. If you can attend, if you can attend in person, great, whether that be as a spectator or a fighter. If you cannot attend, please be online as a virtual spectator. We appreciate you doing that. So coming up in Quarant TV, we have Alec Martinez is going to be back on Monday talking about different LED sabering. He's been talking about like a lot of the basics lately, and then some real interesting off-topic discussion. Mark has been going over kind of his saber LED saber treatise, essentially, that he's put together. So he's been going over that for a while now on his show on Tuesday. A lot of times comes in on the afternoon if you're on the West Coast, or late afternoon on the East Coast. So just keep that in mind. Most of the time with Alec and myself, we are going live at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Central. So, and we might also see some new content as we ramp up into Combat Con and a couple of the things that we're thinking about. So hopefully we can make one of those happen. And I can't think of anything else. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I can. Fortunately, myself, I will be, able to go to a TSL meet this weekend, which will be the first time I've done any major sparring, as opposed to just slow play and technique play in a class scenario, but where I can just do free sparring in a meet scenario, so I don't have to worry about that. Let's see. So Tyler's asking about Combat Con. Yes, Combat Con. CombatCon.com. If you're not familiar with Combat Con, it is a convention dedicated to all types of martial arts and stage combat. And it is in Las Vegas at the end of July, and at the Flamingo. And that is where our international annual TSL tournament is going to be this year. So that will be operating where we crown our tournament champion for in the exotic standards women's and 50 plus divisions. In addition, there are HEMA tournaments that take place for things like rapier, single stick, long sword, cutting, sword and buckler. There are classes for stage combat for all types of different weapons, even things like the bullwhip. It is a wonderful time. I've been going since 2016. Even before TSL was there, and I've enjoyed it every single year for different reasons. So Christian asked, was there a breakdown of a two-handed lunge or thrust, or even the legitimacy of one? So I kind of glossed over it a little bit, and I can talk about it in a little more detail. but the basics is that the concepts that I was talking about apply to a one-handed or a two-handed lunge. I think mainly, that it's just the basics of not stepping too deep, not making sure that your blade is moving before your body. Like all of those things are interest. All of those things are legitimate. Uses in a one or two-handed thrust. I'll give you a quick little like things to think about. Obviously the number one thing to think about is that, like, okay, a one-handed lunge has certain advantages. If I extend in the lunge and I lunge here, it is a longer reach. I have a lot more distance versus, say, I'm here, and I extend and I lunge. I am not stepping anywhere as deep. I'm stepping probably just as far forward with my front foot, but I am not stepping as deep. I mean, granted, I can do a super lunge there, but like, think of the difference in the lunge. I mean, we're talking, because if I grab this thing up here, I mean, yes, I could two-handed lunge down here, but I am shortening myself, right? This distance versus this with the arm extended is much, much shorter. So, but the main thing with a two-handed lunge that you're going to get is you're going to get extra blade control, and you'll get blade control, and it's more difficult to knock you offline. It is much stronger. So, if their blade is on my outside and I lunge like that, it is much harder for them to push my blade offline as opposed to if I go like that, which is part of the concept of why we, use sabers like this that are weighted like a sword. So if I lunge, bam, right, it's weighted so heavily that I won't necessarily get pushed that one-handed. But the idea is that with the two-handed, you are sacrificing some, but there isn't much that changes, which is why I'm not talking about like, oh, your back foot should be doing a specific thing other than not lifting your back leg, meaning not lifting your back leg like this, because there's no difference in the lunge in that concept. But in a two-handed lunge, yes, my foot is turned out a little bit. It's slightly at an angle, probably more so than when I lunge, right? My foot is at more of a 90-degree angle in a one-handed lunge. So there's differences there. You can. One thing I will say is one common thing I see in TSL is the two-handed fighters who want to fight or want to lunge one-handed. So I see things like this. They're here, and then they go bam, right? That's obviously a thrust, but sometimes they'll do something like bam. It's a very dynamic move. It could work. The problem is that you lose a lot of mechanical advantage depending where their blade is. You would not want to do it if their blade was on this side and you're here, right? I would not recommend doing this because you are exposing your whole back of your arm for a strike. But if their blade's on that side, sure, you could do it, And that's not to say it's not valid. I will say it's just structurally compared to a one-handed lunge, a two-handed lunge. This, yes, I do get extra inches on that, but especially with it being my offhand, which is what most people are going to do with that kind of lunge, it's going to be more difficult for you to resist if it gets hit or knocked down to not be off target. So, I mean, there is the theory you could fight like this, right? If I'm right-handed, I could fight like this and then go bam, and I could step nice and clean. Yeah, but you're only going to pull that off once. You're not going to pull that off twice. So like the big thing with the extension to that, like that's okay. I'm not necessarily a huge fan because the problem is that you're more off target. Like you're essentially throwing it out there. So like your targeting is going to be off. So if you're going to train yourself to do something like that, you should work on your targeting. So I should focus on a point. If I'm hitting a bob or a pell or something like that, I should focus on a point that I'm going to hit them with, right? But to be honest with you, if I'm fighting, one-handed and I get here, it's about the same length. You're not gaining a whole lot from here to, say, in a one-handed. So if I fought from two-handed and I went like that and pushed my hilt up, right? I've done that one. Doing that, that is still about the same length. We're talking an inch or two, maybe, for less control because you're probably using your weak hand. So yeah, with the two-handed lunge in general compared to a one-handed, the one-handed will get you range. The two-handed will get you control at the price of range, right? And without quillins or a hand guard, a one-handed lunge is a little more open. And because of the nature of how these blades work and how bouncy and how much energy they absorb when they take a hit, you can be knocked off a little easier than you would, say, with a metal rapier. So hopefully that answers your question. And no problem, Tyler, for the details about CombatCon. And if I didn't mention about CombatCon, we are going to be live streaming, and there is a virtual element. So if you're not going to be able to be there, and keep in mind, a COVID vaccination is required for CombatCon this year. So if you're not going to be there because you will not be vaccinated, there is a virtual element as an alternative. And we'll also be live streaming all of our tournaments there, fingers crossed. And I realize I'm talking and gesturing for the camera, and I didn't switch my camera. Sorry about that. Yeah, as Mark said, it's basically the same thing with the left hand attached. It is. The concepts don't change. They become universal because the body can only move so many ways. Grip can change your footwork. Yes, that's true. Depending what guard you're in, if you're in a fourth, third, depending where you are, it can change your footwork. But in reality, you should not be turning your foot in, for example. Your toe should still be pointing towards your opponent. My thing's going to go black again, and I'm just going to do that while it gets launched up again. And next time, I will make sure that my SD card is clear so we don't have this problem. All right. Cool, back. And then, as Joe said, also learning to lie well. If you had a saber that was properly balanced, it would be less bouncy, I bet. If only there was someone watching that could confirm or deny this. Yes, it would be less bouncy. I'm with Mark's Shadowcrest design custom saber. It does bounce less because there's more back weighting, but there is less of that. But I will say, we don't want to just get a well-weighted saber and then trust that to prevent these things from happening. A better tool, a more expensive tool, should not cover up bad technique, if that makes sense. It should improve and make your good technique even better. So we shouldn't use it to cover up. We should be using it to enhance our already great technique because we've been working at it appropriately. So, and I'm glad that made sense, Christian. So, all right. Is there any other questions? I kind of did my wrap up already, and then I talked and answered another question. So, if there are any other questions, let's answer them now. Otherwise, I will start to log off. And I already said about Alec and Mark next week. The saber you were using to demonstrate, was that a saber forge? So hang on one sec, Tyler. You can only prevent so much bounce in polycarb as well. Yes, exactly. Because of the nature of it, the blades, if they were incredibly stiff, it would be a different feel. But there is only so much, and it does. That's okay. If you're not keeping me. I'm just being aware of, I know when I've kind of petered out talking about a subject. So there's 4 sabers I have in front of me. So and I use them for different purposes. So this one is a Mando Core light LITE saber. I think technically this is a Mark 1 that's converted to a Mark 3. that I have custom leather. I have leather wrapping and my logo on it. This is my light one. This is it is extremely light compared to other ones. And that if you want a very light saber, and I mean that literally with weight, this is a good option. And I call it it's my stick essentially, because it's like holding a stick. It doesn't have some of the hangups that other weapons do. This one that I use for short is a key saber, a persuader, a very good entry level saber. You can just put a Suba on. You don't have to do a whole lot with it. It's not full length, but that's okay. But it's a very solid, well balanced saber at a very low price. And then this is just a piece of my pike. It's actually not fully extended, but this is just a piece of my pike. This is just Ultra Saber, hence the tape and stuff like that, because I'm cheap and the pikes get beat up, so I don't do a whole lot with it. So it's just that and an extension. And then the last one is the Shadow Crest design. This is a custom one made by Mark Carrico, who's on. Like I said, this is a custom one, so the pommel is custom for me. It has the Suba set back a little bit, as opposed to having the Suba all the way at the end. You can get in a one-handed design where the Suba is even further back. This is kind of like a hand and a half design. The advantage of this one, it also has an oval element to it, so I can get a little bit more of that traditional sword grip. It is also back weighted, so it is weighted more like a sword as opposed to. So if you look at the point of balance on this, right? So it's not balanced there. You can see where is the balance. It's about at the Suba, right? Let's see. Yep. Yeah, it's about at the Suba where it's balanced. So it's like right about here, as opposed to say this one, which is super light, where the point of balance is a little bit in front of the blade, and some of that is personal preference. And weight wise, I mean, there's a big weight difference between it. This is like holding, feels more like holding like a long sword or a hand and a half, because of the back weight and because of the large pommel, and everything. So those are the different sabers that I work with. So no problem. Always willing to show them off. So cool. There we go. So balance. Wouldn't a balanced saber give you a weapon, balance, give you a weapon closer to one that might be covered in the source? Potentially. Well, I mean, I'm not covering a specific source though. Mark is the one that more delves into like this is Hutton, this is this, and we occasionally will talk to it in detail. But me, for the most part, I'm kind of taking the commonalities between all of the different sources and weapons and everything, and then bringing them together. So, um, thank you, Tyler. Yeah, find the one that works best for you, depending on your budget. Yes, you can spend a lot of money and get one through Mark, or spend a lot of money, and I mean the Mando's not a huge thing, but like you can spend a lot of money more so than an entry level saber. But the main thing is like how much do you have to invest? Don't spend $400 on a saber in the concept of not getting the right gear. Get the right armor, and then you can build up and replace pieces to go. I started with Ultra Sabers and Saber Forge weapons and then worked my way out. I mean, I still have, like two or three other sabers that I've used for fighting that still work great. I just use them as kind of like loners when I'm handing someone a weapon. So just keep that in mind. Keep within your budget, because you can go crazy and spend 6, 7, 800 bucks. So cool. And then Mark said the Mandos are 80 bucks empty and decently back weighted. Yes, Mark does his work through Shadow Crest Design. Shadow Crest Design does a lot of etching and custom design of sabers, but then Mark is the custom saber element. They do have a thing called the Mando, which is a back weighted entry level weapon. that's empty. So you'll need to get that installed if you can do it yourself, or they have a installer that they can recommend. So I think it's shadowcrestdesign.com. Mark, as the businessman, you should know that. Yeah, you're going to spend a lot. I mean, right at the beginning, like most people are going to spend probably close to 350. That's a conservative estimate based upon if you're getting used gear for like a lot of the lacrosse stuff. You buy a new fencing mask for like $60 to $70. You buy a saber that is like 80 to 100, and everything else, and you're probably looking at $300 to $350 spending at the beginning of this sport. Then you start to replace things. So the one thing is to make sure is that some stuff fits you and everything. So, yep, shadowcrestdesign.com, or just Google Shadowcrest Design. And the Mando, it's not one that I have, but it is an oval hilt. If you prefer the oval hilt as opposed to a rounded hilt, um, is a wonderful option. And and like I say, if you're looking for like a more back weighted, that is a great entry level option and doesn't cost that much more. The only difference is that they sell that empty, and then you need to get it installed. But if you can do it yourself, that's great. I am super, super lazy and I don't do any installs myself. So okay, I think that's everything. I think I've plugged Mark's business enough and given him enough free advertising. So next week, I will probably be back with another TSL Bad Habits. Let me look at my list here. That will give me an idea of, okay, lunging. I just have a thing that I mark off and say, which episode did I do? And I don't know if Michael is still on, but I did talk about, I think I talked about instinctive fighting, like as far as like flinching, um, in some of the other episodes, because I talked about fighting in a straight line, leaning your head forward, chasing the blade, lunging, taking too big a steps. Those are all things that I have talked about. So, okay. So let me just see here. Cool. And that is going to be everything. So, yeah, Mark uses these $1 flashlights from Walmart, and he throws them in, and they work because you only need a saber that lights up. You don't need a fancy LED setup if you don't want to, and things are going to break. So, Mark is a good resource for being frugal. So yeah, no problem. Glad I could provide the info. And as Mark said, the $1 flash, or Joe said, it's a $1 flashlight is the best bang for your buck in the sport. Because if you have a couple $1 flashlights and they break, as long as they last like one event, they've paid for themselves. Granted, I would say I replace an LED saber on a saber, I don't know, maybe once or twice, every year or so, in a saber that I use heavily. It depends on the setup and how they have it set up, because that depends how much strain gets on the wiring. But anyway, I will see you all next week. Tune into other Corn TV options on our Facebook group, and United Through Sabers.